Hello everyone, Stjepan here. I'm happy to say that Wesley So is finally playing at his true strength. After the bad candidates tournament and the bad start to 2018, he started the US Championship in such fashion that he would be a worthy contender to Magnus Carlsen as well. And I can only say I'm very sorry that he didn't perform this well at the candidates as well. And what he did to Onischuk in this game is such a magnificent display of attacking chess, positional understanding and strategic pressure on Black's position that Alexander Onischuk was simply overwhelmed by Wesley's dominance in the game. And after his great win with the black pieces against Zerebuk yesterday, he scored another victory at the US Championship in round 2 as well. In this game, he had the white pieces against Onischuk, who lost round 1 as well. And Wesley opened with pawn to e4, we have e5 classical, and they entered the Ruy Lopez after bishop to b5, after a6, bishop a4, knight to f6, castles, and bishop to e7, the closed Ruy Lopez. And from this position on, of course, the main move for white is rook to e1, and after b5 chasing the bishop away, bishop to b3, d6, c3, and castles. And from this position on, white plays h3, and black enters the Chigorin, the Breyer, or some other variation. And by the way, I'm sorry if you can hear the background noises. There is some construction going on in my neighborhood, as there often is, and sorry if it bothers you. From this position on, after bishop to e7, Wesley So doesn't choose the most common lines with rook to e1. He plays d3, and this is a slight deviation from the main opening. Of course, it's not bad, but the main idea in the Ruy Lopez for white is to push c3 and then d4, so preparing a major central break. But d3 is slightly slower and more uncommon, but a great idea as well. And from this position on, black can either continue with b5, once again chasing the bishop, bishop to b3, d6 and a4 by white, or he can play d6 as Onischuk did in this game. Now, the downside of d6, even though it's not a bad move, it doesn't mean that white is immediately better, is that white is now able to play c3, and should black play b5, the bishop can immediately come to c2 without wasting a tempo on b3. So after d6, Wesley So of course takes this opportunity. This is the major advantage of black playing d6, so c3 by Wesley So, black castles, rook to e1, bishop to g4 pinning the knight. In this position it wasn't that crucial to play h3 to stop the pin because the position is different. Of course, white isn't preparing d4 just yet, so the e4 pawn is quite reinforced. So allowing the bishop to pin the knight is okay. Knight b to d2, and from this position on, Wesley starts a common Ruy Lopez knight maneuver from d2 to f1 to g3, and then controlling the f5 square and chasing away the bishop. So this is a very common plan for white in this line. Knight to d7, black is starting to reroute his knight, and there is still about 50 games, theoretical games, grandmaster games from this position, and the first deviation will occur in a few moves. h3 now, chasing the bishop away, bishop to h5, bishop to c2, reinforcing e4, centralizing the bishop, knight to b6. Now this is where they exited the theory. There is a few games with knight to c5, which is a more active move, but knight to b6 is good as well for black. Now knight to f1, preparing to come to g3, d5, and black is using his opportunity to strike in the center, which is good. Knight to g3, chasing the bishop away, bishop to g6. And now this is the end of the opening phase. Of course, both sides have developed normally, and white has his common attacking plan in the Spanish, and that's to centralize the knights, to put the knights on f3 and g3, control all the key squares around black's king, and if an opportunity arises to enter the position with queen to h5, perhaps open the center this way and strike with the bishop to h7 and g6, and include the second bishop into the game. So you can see that white has clear attacking opportunities, sometimes here rook to e3, rook to g3. And black of course has to compensate for that by striking in the center and on the queen side, and perhaps sometimes even with f5, f4 if white should allow it, and gaining some initiative on the king side as well. Now from this position on, Wesley simply develops. Black was threatening to exchange the queens in some positions with d takes e4, and if white of course captures with the d pawn, then Onischuk might decide to exchange the queens. So Wesley plays queen to e2, rook to e8, bishop to e3, now all the pieces are developed, the rooks are connected, queen to d6, black develops as well, and now the position actually starts. And white has a slight edge in this position. First of all, he has more attacking prospects. Secondly, anytime he should play knight to f5 and concede double pawns on the f-file, would mean that he gains the bishop pair, of course. There is no way for black to stop that. He could play knight to f5 immediately, but that's not as good. Wesley actually decides to give up his dark squared bishop, reasoning that it isn't that good and he can ruin black's pawn structure on the queen side, so he takes on b6. Bishop takes b6, c takes b6, and now the start of a very aggressive plan by Wesley. And what he did to Onischuk in this game is absolutely astonishing, and you don't expect such a swift blitzkrieg from the Closed Ruy Lopez, but this is now a start of something amazing. h4, h6, bishop to b3, getting back to the long diagonal, striking at the weak f7 square. d4, black decides to close down the position, and now c takes d, knight takes d, knight takes d4, and of course queen takes d4. If black takes with the e-pawn in this position, the position would be almost completely losing, because white would have e5, and after queen to c7, queen to g4, you can see that white is much better. Of course, he's threatening queen takes g6 because the pawn is pinned. So king to h8, and now e6 would be too much for black to handle. So of course, after knight takes d4, Onischuk takes with the queen. And now queen to g4. And this is now the start of the attack. And let's first resolve the issue with black taking on b2 or taking on d3. Both pawns can't be taken, in fact. First of all, if black captures on b2, then the move is rook a to c1, gaining initiative. Taking on g6 doesn't really work, even though it gives white an advantage. Okay, so now, if queen takes g6, black has the option of taking the bishop, which is pinning the pawn, so queen takes b3. And after queen takes g7, gaining a pawn, king takes g7, a takes b3. You can see that the material is equal, however, black has a much worse pawn structure, and the knight has the f5 square, which is strategically winning. However, white has a weak d3 pawn, so this would be slightly unfavorable for him, because he would constantly have to tend to the d3 pawn and defend. But this is better for white as well. Another option after queen takes b2, and the best one, the way for white to gain most advantage, is rook a to c1, and after bishop to c5, rook to c2, chasing the queen away, queen to d4, and now, of course, taking works. Because the queen can't move away from the bishop, because then the bishop on g6 is dropping. So after rook to c2, black would have to keep defending by attacking the bishop on b3, so play queen to a3, which is passive, and you can see that white has a dominant position with more active pieces. So that's why queen takes b2 doesn't work in this position. After queen to g4, of course, the d3 pawn can't be taken either. First of all, if queen to d3, okay, he is still attacking the b3 bishop, but that's easily resolved with rook to e3. And now after queen to d6, defending the g6 bishop, simply rook to d1, queen to c6, still defending, but now rook to c3, queen to b5, and of course, after a move such as a4 and queen to b4, then the g6 bishop is simply dropping, and white would still be better. However, black could take on b3, and after queen to g7, king g7, rook takes b3, you can see that black's position is completely busted. In this position, there is no weak d3 pawn. I'm sorry. White has the d file. White is attacking the b6 pawn, which is easily dropping. The knight has f5, and strategically white is completely winning. So after queen to g4, of course, Onischuk is a strong grandmaster, so he saw all of that. He played queen to d6. And of course, this is now defending the g6 bishop. However, Wesley So now plays even more aggressive, and he strikes with d4. Now, once again, the pawn can't be taken. If black should take either way, the position is lost. First of all, if queen takes d4, then queen g6 is simply winning, taking the bishop. And if after d4, e takes d4, then white would push e5, queen to b4, still attacking the b3 bishop. So if white takes g6, black takes b3, but now e6 opening up the lines. D3 would be the best trying to attack the queen, but now e takes f7, bishop takes f7, and rook to e4, and you can see that that black is completely busted. This is, I think, +10 for white. This is just completely lost. So after d4, Onischuk actually played king to h8, finally getting away from this mighty pin and defending his g6 bishop indirectly. Now rook a to d1, queen to f6, h5, once more a very aggressive move by Wesley. Bishop h7, now d takes c5, queen takes c5, bishop takes f7, grabbing a pawn, and now Wesley is material up. And of course, in a more dominant position, being material up is never a good thing for Wesley's opponents, being material down, sorry, so this is strategically and materially winning for white. First of all, the rook is attacked. Of course, black can't take on b2. So rook to f8, queen to e6, defending. Bishop to f6, queen takes e5, bishop takes e5, and now rook to d7, defending the bishop. And now this is a very easy conversion for white. If bishop takes b2, rook takes b7, of course. Black tries rook a to d8. Rook takes d8, rook takes d8, now b3, saving the pawn, rook to d7, attacking the bishop, bishop e6, rook to e7, bishop d5, and now bishop takes g3. Onischuk doubles Wesley's kingside pawns, but it's really irrelevant in this position. The passed e4 pawn is too strong to be stopped. And after f takes g3, bishop to g8, challenging the bishop, king to f2, trying to centralize the king and bringing the king to the defense of the e4 pawn so that the rook can move. Bishop e6, and now bishop takes, rook takes, king to e3. And you can see that there is no way for black to hold this position. Of course, the 3-2 majority on the queen side is irrelevant because there is no way to create a passed pawn. Because the pawns are doubled, and white has a 3-2 on the king side anyway, so the position is busted. He tries king to g8, rook to f1, g6, h takes, rook to f3, defending the g3 pawn. Now king to g7, e5 advancing, rook to g4, king to d3, b5, e6, rook to g6, e7, and now rook to d6 check, and after king to e2, there's no way for black to stop the pawn. Of course, the king can't approach because the rook is on the f-file. If the rook tries attacking from d7, then simply e8 queening. If the rook goes to d8, then e takes d. And the crucial line, if the rook goes to e6 trying to defend with check, then simply rook to e3 is completely lost, because if rook e6, then rook e3. If king here, then rook takes rook, and after king takes rook, queening with e8 queen, and that's busted, completely lost. So after rook to d6 and king to e2, Onischuk resigned, and Wesley won his second brilliant game at the US Championship. And I have to say I'm very excited with the way he's playing. Of course, Fabi won his game as well in a 23 move miniature in the French defense. Ray Robson has 1.5, and Var Akobian has 2 points, so he won both of his games as well. So it's still a close fight, and we will see what happens throughout the tournament. Anyway, a great start to the US Championship, and very exciting games. The players aren't going for passive openings. Okay, everybody, I hope you liked this amazing win by Wesley So, and stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much. Bye.